So the topic I've taken today for the workshop is politics and governance. So what do you understand by politics and governance in your life? What does it mean to any of you? Like, what is your idea of politics or governance? How does it influence your life? Yeah, Vishruth.
Yeah, so politics is essentially uh the people who rule us in a democratic nation usually who argue and debate on what kind of government they should form. Government is essentially governance, that is. It is essentially the way we are controlled by the government. There are many types of governance like totalitarianism, socialism, etc. On the other hand, politics is discussion and deliberation between members of the government.
Yes, that is absolutely correct. So you look at the current government in India, you look at the opposition parties, most of those political parties come together to form a government. So government, you can talk, so the government basically composes of those political parties who have won an election. The opposition consists of those political parties who have not won an election, but they're also a significant part of governance because they hold the current government in check. But more importantly, they also have independent, they're also independent political parties. So you would have heard about the Congress political party, you would have heard about the BJP political party, which are two of India's biggest political parties. So they do influence your life in a significant way. Okay, let's do a brief introduction then of what politics and governance is. Okay, politics and governance are fundamental aspects of your life. So from everything like the clothes you're wearing, the house you're living in, the school you go to, the things you study, this very workshop, the platform that you are doing this workshop on, all of it in some way or the other is a consequence of the way political parties act, the way politics functions, or the way governance specifically, like how specific actors or how specific governments run us and run our lives. Politics is about the process of making decisions between political parties. So, for example, if you have a political party and if you have B political party, and if they're coming together to form a government, then they would have to agree on something. So it depends upon whether they're agreeing to pass policies based upon what they want, based upon what they don't want. Hence, they have to come to a middle ground to make sure that they can form policies. So, political parties have their own political ambitions. So, probably political parties want to get elected again to power because they want to remain in power. You have seen the current government, which has been in power for two times and now has come back for the third time because all political parties love remaining in power because that's them. That's what helps them earn money. That's what helps them keep their party together. Governance, on the other hand, refers to what you do once you're elected. So once you have come to power and once your elections are done, the politics has to be kept aside and you have to govern. So when you talk about governance, you talk about the specific policies that governments make. So in terms of infrastructure or the house you're living in, what sort of roads they should construct, like how the environmental pollution should be stopped, or whether in India right now you've seen that there's massive heat waves, specifically in North India. In that context, governments have to frame policies to make sure that at least people are safe. So all of that comes under the ambit of governance. So that's about politics and governance and an introduction. Let's go into more specifics. What do you understand by left wing and right wing? Because uh, most politics is situated around political ideologies. So, what do you understand by right wing and left wing? Anyone? Yeah, Vansh, namesake. Yes.
Sir, I think right wing is more dictatorship and left wing is more like a democracy, like everybody has right to speak and everybody has the right to vote, like that.
Okay. Anybody else?
Yeah, could I answer?
Yeah, we should. Go ahead.
Yeah, so right wing is essentially more conservative. Yeah, I think conservative is the right word. So right wing people, like the current government, they believe that a return to traditional values is preferred over new, more liberal values. On the other hand, left wings or left wingers like socialists and sometimes communists, left wingers believe that a more liberal, modernized, quote unquote, modernized approach is required. They believe in equality for all, sometimes even going so far as to suggest redistribution of wealth. Both extremes of this political spectrum are very bad. Like extreme right wing leads to a Nazi-esque dictatorship. Extreme left wing, on the other hand, leads to a Soviet era communist dictatorship. And centrism is what a majority of the people prefer, as it is a balance between both right and left.
Yeah, that is very accurate. And this is where right wing is not undemocratic. They are just different agreements and disagreements in a specific democratic setup. So they disagree on everything. They disagree on how much rights you should give to people. So the left wing has historically believed that you need more state control and more state regulation. So when the left wing says that you have to go ahead and provide welfare to people, so welfare looks like giving money to people, giving cash handouts to people, creating schemes of loans for people. All of that is significantly left wing because that's where you have state intervention and more welfare. On the other hand, the right wing says that people should earn money on their own. So the concept of capitalism, which promotes competition in an economy, all of that is a function of the right wing, which says that you should earn money on your own. The right wing also says that you should have stricter criminal punishments, such as death penalty. The left wing, on the other hand, says that you should probably have more liberal punishments, such as longer criminal sentences and no death penalty. So there's no political ideology that is undemocratic. There is no political ideology that is incorrect or correct. It's all about what you believe in, and it's about where you can find the middle ground. And that's where the concept of centrism came about, which is where both sides of the political aisle, that is the left wing and the right wing, had to come together to govern because they recognized that the only way in which they can effectively govern by is by cooperating with each other, because if they keep fighting with each other, then there's no point of governance, there's no point of politics at all, because it would make politics far more violent, it would make politics far more toxic. And that's the reason why the concept of centrism came about. So that's about ideologies. Everybody has their own ideologies. I have my own ideologies. Other individuals have their own political ideologies, but there are no political ideologies which are incorrect as such, because there's a justification or there's a perspective to everything in life, because the left wing and the right wing disagree on everything, and they do have justifications for everything. So that's about the left wing and the right wing. Let's move on. Okay, let's first talk about political parties and what political parties really want. Political parties want money, political parties want votes, and political parties want candidates, want a candidate. So what do they need the money for? Anyone? Why would a political party need money? Anyone? It's literally there on the screen. Yeah, anybody other than Vishruth? Yeah, Kabir, go ahead.
So like they can give back to the like people, they can build roads and all that. Like financial stuff, like they can build hospitals, they can build schools and all that. That's why they need the money.
Yeah, but that is often a thing that a government does. What about an opposition political party? Like, what would they need money for?
Oh,
Every
maybe
political party loves money. Yeah, sure.
maybe like they would need money for campaigns against
Yeah.
the parties.
Yeah, they would need money for a campaign, and if you have to create an effective campaign, you would need to create advertisements. So when you see advertisements on television, all of that is a function of political parties having a lot of money. So that's the basic thing that for which political parties want money. Yeah, Neil, go ahead.
I wanted to say why they want votes. They want
Yeah.
votes so that they could get elected for being the next government or the next prime minister.
Yeah, that is true. Because as we discussed, political parties want to come back to power. Political parties want to run specific states. Hence they want to get as many votes as possible because it is good for their re-election incentive. Vishruth, yes.
Yeah, like somewhat the same point. So, like, for example, let's take a party that is currently in the opposition. I'm not using any examples. So, like, let's say an opposition party X, it needs the money, especially because after re-election, it needs there should be some kind of in theory, all parties need money so that they run a government well. However, for the opposition party, especially, the question of money is equally important because they should be able to offer some semblance of resistance to the current ruling government. So for yeah.
Yeah, that is absolutely correct. Uh, okay. Yeah. Arnav, you want to say something? Arnav? Okay, we'll move on to the third thing, which is a candidate. So they want the money to create an effective campaign, as we have discussed. They want the votes to come back to power because that's how they implement their policies. But to actually get elected, you need a candidate. So every political party wants a leader. Think about a movement, or think about, so for example, in school, if you don't have your principal, what do you think will happen to a school? Or for example, imagine that a company does not have their CEO. What do you think will happen? The party will be in disarray, and the party will not have effective leadership. It will not have the vision it wants. because of an effective vision and keeping everybody together is the requirement for most political parties, and the way you do it is by having a candidate who can hold people together. Yeah, Vishnu, you want to add?
Yeah,
Sure.
nothing much. So today I had an MU and a very similar thing happened. It was BJP, and out of nowhere, Narendra Modi joined the Congress. So something very similar happened.
Yeah, that's quite
Because
funny
Narendra
actually.
Modi was a first timer, so a lot of chaos happened.
Okay, yeah. So that's why candidates are really important for political parties, because they hold the party together and everybody can look up to them and people can vote for a candidate. So for example, if I'm from minority community, then I would want someone from my community to represent me in a political party. So for example, a lot of women will want to vote for a woman in the elections, and the way for political parties to get the woman vote is by making sure that they have a woman candidate on the ticket, because that's what helps them get women votes, and that is true for everybody or most people, because the principle of voting and the reason why people vote is because they want to feel represented in a democratic system. So that's what political parties really want, and these are the three things we are going to talk about of how they achieve all of these three things. Firstly, let's talk about votes. How do they get the votes? Let's talk about the concept of vote banks. So obviously, you have come across different people in your family. You have your parents, you have your grandparents, you have yourselves. All three groups of people have different requirements out of life. So, for example, if you're a young person and you are rising up, and if you're growing up, presumably you want good quality education and you want good things to study, or you want good teachers. That's the thing that you really care about. When you say get at 20 years of age, and when you complete your master's and you're looking for a job, then your priorities change, because now you're a young person and not a kid anymore. When you're a young person, you probably need a good job, so you need to solve the unemployment problem. After 35, 40, you probably want a really good job where you can earn a huge amount of money. And then when you get at 60, when your retirement age is about to come, you would want a good retirement, so you would want pension later, which is the government giving you money and you getting enough money even when you're not working. So different people in an economy, or different people generally in a country, have different requirements, and that is what specific political parties cater to or cut to. For example, there are different vote banks that political parties create for themselves. So the right wing, for example, has historically been known to be the biggest voter base for the middle class voter, because the middle class voter looks for jobs, and the right wing pushes for more jobs within the economy. That's how you can create. That's how specific things are created, and the right wing specifically caters to the white collar workers, because that is the thing that helps them the most, or those are the sorts of people who want to vote for the right wing the most. Or, for example, you have the young people and the old people who vote on different policies. So, for example, if you're a part of a family, presumably the entire family votes on a specific issue, such as marital law. Or, for example, if the old people in your family are getting their pensions on time, then presumably your family will want to vote for that political party. You also vote on childbirth policies. So, for example, specific states have a one child policy because India suffers from a massive overpopulation problem. So, in those states, do you want to support the one child policy and hence support the political party, or do you not want to support the political party at all? So, those are the specific issues that people vote on when it comes to their age. The third is minorities. So, when you are for a specific gender identity, whether you are a religious minority in India, or whether you are a social minority in India, or whether you are a gender minority in India, or whether you are a refugee, those are the sorts of things that play down on your head. So, for example, if there's a government in power, how much can they make sure that you are not a victim of social inequality, or how much they can make sure that you are not a victim of religious polarization, or how much they can make sure that they can provide you with significant welfare? All of those things are weighed down on you. So, the three big categorizations of the vote banks is the kind of profession you are in, and based on that, the policies the political parties create. The second is the age you have, which also becomes a marker for people or the political parties to create policies. And the third thing is your identity as an individual, which you are born with, which is also what political parties can frame policies on. So this is about vote banks. And at no point can one political party obviously cater to everybody at the same time, because you would think that presumably a political party can't convince everybody that they are going to create policies for them, because the thing about policies is that they come at concessions. So if you're providing benefits to someone, then the intuitive thing is that you take away benefits from other people. So for example, let's take the example of the young and the old people. If you have to provide pension schemes for the old people, you have to take away money from somewhere. Sorry, there's disturbance. Okay, yeah. If you have to create good pension schemes for the old people and you have to give them money, obviously, like a country or a government does not have infinite amounts of money, so it has to take away money from somewhere. So it takes away money probably from creating jobs, because it says that presumably we are going to put in money for the old people and reduce the number of jobs that exist in the economy. That possibly means that you isolate the young voter base, which wants to work, and you want the old voter base. So because resources are limited and because you can't do everything at the same time, considering that governments don't have unlimited amounts of money, is the reason why some parties prioritize specific vote banks, other parties prioritize specific vote banks, and those are the ways in which politics happens, or those are the ways in which elections happen, because specific people vote for specific parties based on the policies that those parties create for them. So that's about vote banks. Does anybody have any thoughts about vote banks, and what are the sorts of issues that really affect you as an individual right now? Anyone?
Wait, so issues that affect us as individuals, which are a result of the grand scheme of things, right?
Sorry, can you repeat? I didn't get your question.
What?
Can you repeat? What did you say?
Yeah, so could you repeat your question? That's what I was asking.
No, so my question was, can you think of things that affect you in daily life and things which you would want to vote for once you like become 18 years or you turn to 18 years?
Can I
What are
have
the sorts of issues that affect you?
can I have a minute?
Yeah, sure. Everybody can take a minute and think about anything that affects you, which you would really want to vote on.
Yeah, could I?
Yeah, sure.
Well, one thing that affects not me personally, but as a student, I feel that many others suffer as a result of it. Again, I don't want to pinpoint any parties for this. For like the recent NEET scandal. So essentially, like what happened was, I'm pretty sure you know about this. So NEET
Yes.
students who haven't prepared were given more marks. A lot of controversies happened in specific exam centers. And even though many students spent years of their lives studying, the I don't think the government, different exam centers gave marks to not undeserving, but they didn't give marks fairly. For example, so two students got 1 mark above the total possible marks. So such things can greatly hinder the development of students, especially people from tribal communities, SC, ST, that kind of thing. Secondly, even in the very long term of things, if this kind of thing continues, we would have a bunch of untrained and possibly uneducated doctors.
Yeah, because if you don't end up being in a proper exam, if you don't end up being properly marked, then it possibly means that a lot of people can clear the exam without actually having proper knowledge about the profession.
Exactly,
So
and
yeah,
they could it'll become a job just for the money.
yeah, that is true. So basically, the issue is quality of education. So as a student, what you would want is good quality education and making sure that everybody has equal opportunities, as opposed to the system being biased towards specific people or the system having lots of problems in terms of education. Yeah, that's a very important issue, and that would possibly help you in getting a good job later, or it would help, uh, at the very least, reducing social inequality in society when everybody gets a fair opportunity. Yeah, that's one thing that really drives on upon students. Does anyone want to add anything else beyond education which really affects you as a possible voter or as a prospective voter when you turn 18 years? Anything?
Maybe like problems like you don't have enough facilities, like there are not enough hospitals or not enough schools.
Yeah, very true. For example, yeah, you would need a hospital, you would need sanitation facilities. So for example, Delhi right now is having massive power outages, like light goes out very often. So those are the basic facilities that people want, because that affects your daily life. Even if you're a student or you are an old person, these are the sorts of issues that affects everybody. Yeah. Neil, do you want to add? And then Arna.
I feel something which affects me is that I feel there's a lot of pollution in Mumbai where I live. So the government should do something about it.
Yeah, Mumbai has a big problem of the rising sea levels. So you would really want to solve that problem. So the government should make sure that probably there's less wastage of water, but more importantly, there's less climate pollution, because that causes the sea levels to rise. Yeah. Arna, do you want to add anything?
Yeah,
We'll come.
there's a
Yeah.
major. It's not affecting me, but it is affecting like our country a lot. So basically, corruption within the legal system, like and the leniency with the legal system, that's like a huge problem that I think should be handled with, because it's very easy to sort of bribe any legal authority, like here in India.
Yeah. So as a student or as a young person, you really care about issues such as corruption, and you would not want your government or your systems to be corrupt, so that you can have accountability and people can hold each other to some accountability and be transparent. That's the essence of a democracy.
It also
Yes.
increases like the safety. Isn't so.
Yeah. Safety also is a big issue. For example, installing CCTV surveillance cameras in Delhi could be a big thing to make sure that at least it's very safe in the night. Yes. Yeah. Does anybody want to add anything? Okay. Or we can move on. Okay. Let's move on then. So this is about vote banks and how what are the specific issues people vote on. Let's move on. Okay. Considering this is the case, obviously political parties often do some terrible things because political parties often want to make sure that the opposition's voter base does not show up in an election. Because if the entire opposition's voter base shows up in an election, then it possibly means that their chances of winning an election might be relatively less. That is where political parties try to make sure that the voter banks of the other political parties don't show up in an election. So they do a bunch of really bad things. For example, they manipulate voter ID laws or roll purges or polling reductions. So what they try to really do is that in specific constituencies where the opposition is bound to win and everybody knows about it, specific actors go ahead and engage in things like poll violence, or what they engage in is trying to drag the process of elections or on the election day to make sure that people don't show up to vote and they get disoriented. So those constituencies become less influential in the grand scheme of things. So it's just a lot of really bad things that political parties end up doing because they do not want the opposition to have any chance of winning. And this obviously happens in systems where you do not have a very strong election commission, or systems where systems of voting are not super independent or transparent. So those are the systems where governments can interfere and governments can influence the way in which people turn out within elections. Obviously, systems like the United States, where the authority that conducts elections is really independent, is where it is relatively harder for the Democratic Party or the Republican Party to go ahead and do voter manipulation. But it happens far more, say, in like developing countries where institutions are not as independent. There are other things also that they do. For example, they do gerrymandering, which is a very big thing. So what political parties end up doing when they're in power is that they redraw electoral constituencies. So they conveniently modify the size or the boundaries of electoral constituencies in a way in which they can get the votes, and in a way in which the subsequent constituencies or the constituencies with a pre-existing constituency do not vote, or those voters get clubbed in to this constituency. So this is a practice that's really prevalent actually in the United States also, because this is something that does not happen during an election, but when you are in power. So this is another way in which they do voter manipulation. They also do misinformation campaigns in a lot of times. So they give you wrong dates about an election. They give you wrong timings of an election, often on social media. So misinformation is often something that becomes like really prevalent, specifically when you are on social media. Hence, as a voter, it is really important to be informed at all points about your rights, about the specific party that you're voting for, about the local knowledge of your poll booths and where you're voting. Yeah, Smrit. Sorry, if I'm mispronouncing that name. Yeah.
Sir, I didn't understand gerrymandering.
Okay, I'll explain that again. So, uh, imagine you have imagine you have a constituency, and the boundaries of the constituency have already been drawn. What political parties do when they come to power is that they have the power to determine the boundaries of a constituency. So, for example, if say the constituency I'm living in is has a size of 2,800 square kilometers, uh, presumably what a candidate would do is that the candidate will want to increase the size or to include voters in a specific manner where you are able to reduce the power of those voters. So they tend to redraw the boundaries of an electoral constituency, and that is what gerrymandering is called. And governments obviously have the power to do this when they are in power, because they do have influence over gerrymandering or redrawing boundaries of constituencies. This is also very prevalent in the state of Karnataka. This also happens a lot in the United States. Yeah. Uh,
Yes, sir.
okay. Vishrut, yeah, you want to add?
Yeah, so like no offense to anybody here who supports any party, but isn't this what the ruling party is more or less trying to do?
So it's something that political parties do all the time. It's not a function of any political party because that is the thing that helps them gain power. That is the thing that helps them go ahead and get power. So it's not something that's a function of any ideology, but something that everybody does. So it's fine. We can probably move on. The next thing that political parties actually do is vote buying. So what they end up doing is that because they have lots of money, in an illegal manner, they tend to influence voters by paying them off or rather in very socially deprived areas where presumably there are not enough people or the people are really poor and they have a dire need for money. In exchange for money, these people tend to vote for a party. So these are the lots of artificial ways in which political parties try to influence elections, and this is something that all political parties do to some degree because it's they also think that it is really hard for them to legally win an election or win an election in a proper manner. Obviously, if an election commission is really strong and independent, then it becomes far harder for political parties to do this, and this is more prevalent in systems where the election commission is influenced by external actors to a significant degree. So that's all about voter manipulation and suppression, and about how political parties get votes and how political parties curb uh, the other opposition party getting votes. Let's move to money, because this is the second thing that political parties really care about, and we discussed how, like, why they want money for an effective campaign. They want money for to fund their other wings or the other social activities that they do. How do they raise money is the question. Obviously, the way they do it is via the means of campaign financing, and they have lots of donors which give them money. So you have big corporations who give political parties money because corporations want some benefits for themselves. So for example, a political party would accept money from a corporation and in return would promise them making a favorable policy when they come to power. You also have foreign donors. So, for example, you have uh, lots of wealthy individuals who want to contribute to a political party, or non-resident Indians who are sitting abroad and who have specific interests back at home, and hence they would have incentives to give money to a political party. You also have party members and the loyal supporters of a party giving money in the form of membership fees to a party, which helps a party raise money uh, during an election or before an election, because most parties have a membership fee. So at some point, the higher level candidates or the senior leadership of parties do have to contribute a significant money to the party structure. You also have crowdfunding and individual donations. So in a lot of cases, political parties create effect like campaigns on social media because they want to engage in crowdfunding so that they can attract donors. And the final thing is electoral bonds, which you heard recently, which got banned in India. So electoral bonds was a scheme through which specific political parties used to get money from corporations without the corporations ever going public. So they would do it in a secretive manner, and the government had come up with a method to do it to make sure that political donors can specifically contribute to a party without their names being revealed to the public. So that would help in maintaining secrecy. So these are the different things that or the different ways in which political parties raise money for themselves, because and this money is utilized for all of the things that we have previously talked about. Okay, let's move to the third thing, which is the candidate. And this is the most crucial part, because you can have the money, or you can have the money, you can also have the votes. But the question really is, how do you get the vote, and where you're putting the money is the real question. And this is where having a candidate becomes really important. And this is where we are going to talk about the structure of political parties and how political parties specifically function, or how political parties influence specific people within their party to run for power. Okay, let's talk about structure of political parties. Most political parties, other than having that the general average person in a party or a party executive, has three big portions of a political party. The first are party presidents. Party presidents, as the name would suggest, are people who lead a party. So, for example, these are people who run the party and head the party, and everybody looks to them. So, they are the highest authority at the end of the day, and they decide everything that goes on in the party. So, for example, it's the higher authority or it's the party president that decides who runs for office in different constituencies. So, for example, if you have the Congress political party and Sonia Gandhi at once upon a time used to be the party president, then Sonia Gandhi would decide who runs from which constituency because she would have the majority of the decision making authority. The second thing or the second portion of political parties is the senior leadership. So it's not just about a party president, but also about people who are experienced within a political party who have stayed for a long period of time. So, for example, both the political parties, such as the BJP and the Congress right now, have a significant number of leaders who are old, who have been in the party for around 30 to 35 years because because they have significant experience, and the party tends to tag them as senior leadership because this senior leadership is experienced, they have expertise of politics, and they can make decisions in the interest of the party. So, party presidents and the senior leadership together form the major crux of the party or the core of the party, who influence the different things that happen within a party and what a party should do ideally. So, for example, designing a manifesto in an election before an election, or once you come to power, what sort of policy you should pass, or how you should come back again, or what are the sorts of relations that you should have with other political parties when you are in power or when you are out of power. So that all of this is done by the senior leadership combined with the party president. The third structure or the third integral portion of a political party are party whips. The system of party whips is that think about your class monitor. So in your class, when you have a class monitor who makes sure that everybody is disciplined, or at the very least everybody is quiet in class and they do not talk, or you have prefects, you would have that in your school. That's exactly how party whips function. Party whips make sure that everybody in a party is disciplined. So what does that mean? Imagine a parliament where you have everybody, or for example, you have 200 uh, MPs, members of parliament, from a political party. All of these people are bound to what the party whip is going to say or what the party whip asks them to do. So, for example, if there's a policy that is being voted on in the parliament, then it's the party whip that they have to follow, and everybody has to follow what the party whip is saying because the party can't afford to be inconsistent, and everybody should vote together. So, for example, if there is a political party and there is B political party, then all of the MPs of the apolitical party will vote a specific way. Or so, for example, they'll say yes to a policy, and a party will make sure that nobody in the political party says no, and everybody says yes. So they keep the party together when you have to vote on specific issues. Yeah, for sure.
Also, it's not always necessary that the senior leadership of a party always has to agree, right, with what the party says, like Shashi Tharoor or Subramanian Swamy.
Yeah, that is true. That is true. So senior leaderships tend to at least visibly make sure that they are not portraying an image uh, where they are not united. At least publicly, they portray the image that all of them are united, even though they have internal disagreements. Obviously, if you're an individual person, obviously, if you live in different contexts or different constituencies, you have your different opinions, and that's why parties allow for some dissent within, which also we'll talk about later. But the key thing is that publicly they have to remain united because they do not want any sign of weakness. That is something that's really crucial.
All right,
Yeah,
thank you.
yeah. Niyati?
Yes, sir. Could you please tell the distinctive features which like separate these three office holders?
Yeah, sure. So, party president, for example, is just one person. The senior leadership composed of multiple people. So, imagine a school. You have your principal, and then you have your senior teachers. The principal is the final decision making authority, but the principal also consults the different teachers because those are the people that form the core of the school, and those are the people that have to collectively make a decision. So, the party president is an individual, the senior leadership composed of multiple people. These people combined together make a decision, but the final decision making authority is the party president. So the senior leadership can't make a decision without taking the party president on board because the party president is the final say or has the final say in the decision making authority of a political party. On the other hand, the party whip basically listens to what the senior leadership is saying. So imagine this. Uh, yeah, as I suggested, think of a prefect or think of a monitor in class. That prefect is the one that remains in touch with the teachers, and that prefect is the one that if helps the students to communicate with the teacher, because the teacher does not take requests from every individual student. What the teacher says is that those individual students should come to the monitor and the monitor will collectively raise the concern or raise the doubts with a teacher, because that's the most systematic way of doing it. This is the similar case here. So the party basically acts as a middleman between the rest of the political party or the party executives and the senior leadership of the party, because this is the person that communicates between the two entities. So if the average person or if the average political party member has some problems, then they would go through the whip to the senior leadership. And if the senior leadership wants the average political party members to vote in a specific manner, then they would tell it to the party whip, and the party whip will make sure that these people vote in that manner. Uh,
Got it.
does that make
Thank
it clear?
you.
Perfect.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, let's move on further then. Candidate selection. So, what are the different things that political parties keep in mind when they have to select a candidate for a seat? So, for example, in Delhi, if there's the West Delhi constituency, that's where I live, then presumably, what would a political party keep in mind to make sure that they pick the right candidate? Because think about this. You again, for example, if you have an election in class for becoming the prefect, then you presumably have not just one person who's running the election. In the election, you have possibly 3 to 4 people or 5 to 6 people, and out of them, one gets elected. Similarly, political parties have to decide on one specific candidate, considering that there are multiple people from that constituency who have already worked within a party. So in West Delhi, presumably, say the Congress has around 4 to 5 people who are really senior, but they still have to pick one person because it's only the one person that can represent them in the elections. So what are the different things they keep in mind? Firstly, electoral viability. So presumably political party has to gauge whether this person can actually win or not. Some individual might have a greater chance of winning than the other individual, and hence they would want to make sure that the individual that has a greater chance of winning is on the ticket, as opposed to the person who's less likely to win. Secondly, you also want loyalty and service to the party. So think about this. There might be an individual who might be electorally more viable, but then an individual who's not loyal to the party at all. So if this is a person that does not listen to the party but is probably more electorally viable, the party would not want them, because presumably the party would want someone they can control and not someone who would always act on their own accord. So loyalty and service to the party also is something that's really important for political parties. Third, community representation. So as we talked about, uh, an individual from a constituency should ideally be a person who should represent the needs of the community, or who should be from the community themselves. So, for example, if you would ask someone from Delhi to fight in a constituency in Bihar, then possibly that cannot work, and it's unlikely that the people in Bihar vote for the person coming from Delhi, because they don't relate with that person, because the context in which they have been brought up in are very, very different. Fourthly, public image. As someone talked about earlier about corruption and why corruption is something that's really bad, most parties want to field those candidates at least who are not corrupt, or at the very least who people can trust in, or people who have like a relatively good public image. And fifthly, experience and expertise. Obviously, you would not want someone who has no experience in politics, because you would want someone who has had some past experience, who has done some social work, who probably the commands respect within the party, because they are very, very experienced. So obviously these are complex things, and one might come at the cost of another. So, and this is where political parties try to find the balance of the middle ground between these 5 factors to make sure that they pick the most suitable candidate to fight in an election. So these are different things they keep in mind, and that's how they choose from a pool of people of who they should field on in a specific constituency. So that's about candidate selection. Obviously, candidate selection happens on different levels. So, for example, uh, if the BJP has to choose a candidate for the prime minister, they would do it on a national level. But they also have to choose candidates on different state levels, because they fight state elections independently. So, other than getting the seats in the national election in Delhi, BJP also would want to fight the state election in Delhi, and that's where you would also want to select candidates at a state level. Similarly, you would want to do it on a district level, and because elections are fought not just on the national level, they're also fought on the state level. They're also fought in district level in the form of municipal department, like MCD elections, which happens in Delhi, and it also happens in Mumbai. In Mumbai, I think it's BMC. So these are two key examples of how elections happen, and parties have to make sure that they pick the right candidate, not just in the national election, but also in the state election and consequently in the district elections. Okay, if that is the case, Obviously, so there are 5 or 6 people as we talked about, and from them one is going to be picked. What do you think will happen to the 4 people or the 5 people who don't get picked? Anyone? Anyone? So there's one person who does get selected for the ticket, but there are lots of people who don't. What do you think they do, or how do you think this affects them?
Could you repeat the question? I was unable to hear. My net is glitching.
Sure. So the question was that we talked about candidate selection, and out of say 5 or 6 people, the party or the political party would end up selecting one person. But what about the people who are not selected at all? What happens to them is the question. Yeah,
Could I? Oh,
just 1 second. Let's go through the people who have raised their hands. Let's start with Arnav first, and then Kabir.
Okay, so I think the people who do not get selected, they will the most probable thing is that they'll leave the party, or they'll feel that they're not worthy enough, or others didn't think that they're worthy enough for the post.
Yeah, that is very true. So they just feel that the party has betrayed them. They would want to leave the party. They would want to join another political party. Yeah, Kabir. Yes.
They would get mad and reveal the secrets of the party, and they would like talk bad about the party, which makes other people believe the party is really bad.
Yeah, that could be a way because they're too frustrated with the party. So, for example, if there's someone in the party who's been there for 25 years and suddenly the party betrays them, they would feel that the party has betrayed their work and they would want to just go out public and say that this party is really bad and they would want to
yeah.
leave.
Yeah.
That could be a massive problem for a political party. Yeah. Yeah, Vishnu.
Yeah, pretty much the same thing. So nothing much to add. So like, but if this happens like a large number of times, so like a party leadership or the central command of the party should actually be competent in such things, because if they continuously do such things all over a large nation, like prioritizing young talents over old stalwarts, then what happens is the party will begin to splinter into different factions. That happened with Indira Gandhi. That happened recently with ADMK in Tamil Nadu, where I'm from.
Yeah, it happened in all states. It happened in Maharashtra also.
It
It
happens
happened in,
everywhere. So like the
yeah,
party command becomes incompetent and utter chaos breaks loose.
yeah, that is true. So that's what causes different things that happen in a political party. So dissent and discontent leads to public outcry, as Kabir mentioned. You also have defections. So defection is when and a leader is pushed to the point where they just decide to leave a party. Obviously, then the reverse of this is that a political party just gives money to a leader from another political party to pull them out of that party. So defections can either be ill-intended because they are often used as a way to destabilize a party. They're often well-intentioned also because some people genuinely want to leave. So that's where India's anti-defection law wanted to find the balance between the two different things, and that's where India's anti-defection law says that if until two thirds of the party members do not leave, till that point, the person is disqualified. What does this mean? Think of a party which has, for example, 50 members of parliament in in a specific election. If one individual decides to leave the party and join another party, they cannot, because they would be disqualified and they will not be allowed to run for office from the different political party until the next electoral cycle. So, for example, in say India's next election is in 2029, and somebody today from a party decides to leave the party, then they get disqualified, and even if they join another political party, they can't run for office for that political party until 2029. So if there's one person who just leaves, then presumably they're not allowed to fight till the next election cycle. But if a significant portion of the party leaves, so if say two-thirds of the majority, so out of 50, the two-thirds of 50 is 32 or 30, around 33. If 33 people leave out of 50, then the 33 people can go ahead and join a political party and fight for elections, because that is where the constitution says that until two-thirds of the majority of a party do not leave, till then parties are under the legitimate right of disqualifying these people. But if it is more than two-thirds, then they can leave and they can still retain their power. So that is all about defections. They can also run as independent candidates because they don't want to join a political party at all. So they would want to run as a third party candidate, or a candidate who's not in any political party. The other thing they might do is they might splinter up and just create a new political party of their own, because they are just fed up of all political systems and they want to have a third alternative from the two dominant parties, and they would want to create a party of their own. So there are different ways in which a leader or a bunch of leaders in a political party express their discontent based upon how much discontented they are or how dissatisfied they are with their previous political party. Okay. Am I still visible? Or is the PPT still visible?
Yeah.
Okay. Just one second. Okay. That's all about parties, political parties. Let's move to coalition politics, because most elections are never won by a dominant political party. For example, you saw that the BJP right now had 240 seats out of and they could not reach the 271 mark to form a majority government of their own. And that is where coalition politics becomes really important, because coalition politics involves different political parties coming together to go ahead and form a government in power. So, for example, the BJP has the Janata Dal or the TDP. You don't need to remember the names of these parties. You maybe remember them as A, B, and C. They have to come together to reach the halfway mark. India has 543 seats at the national level. So, for you to legitimately form a government, you need to have more than half. So, the half of 543 is 271.5. So, if you have 272 or if you have 273, then you can form a government of your own via coalition partners. So the coalition partners that are the different political parties have to combine their seats together, and once they combine their seats together, they can form a government or stake claim to form a government. Yeah, we should.
Yeah, so only one thing, this is my favorite part of Indian politics. So the thing is, coalition governments are always like unstable, right? There's always
Yeah,
an
we
edge to it.
we'll discuss about that. Yeah, we are going to talk about it right now. Yeah.
It's my favorite part of Indian politics.
Yeah, let's talk about it. I'll talk about how coalition politics works and how they can form good policies, they can also form really bad policies. Okay. What is the purpose and why are coalitions ever formed? And I think this is really important. First is consolidation of political power. As I discussed earlier in the example, if there is a political party which does not have the number of required seats to form the government on their own, then they have to seek support of different political parties, and they can combine their seats together or the number of seats together to form the government. So, for example, A has 240 political seats, B has 17 political seats, and C has 20 political seats. A without B and C cannot form a government of its own because it has not reached the halfway mark. So A would need to combine with B and C because they would together have the numbers to reach the halfway mark. So 240 plus 17 would be 257, and 257 plus 20 would be 277, and 277 will help that coalition government to come to power because they have crossed the halfway mark. So individual parties cannot form governments of their own when they have not reached the halfway mark, and that is where consolidation of political power is required. Yeah, Vishnu.
I forgot to lower my hand. Sorry.
Okay, no worries. The second is avoiding voter fracturing. This is really crucial, and I'm going to take some time here. Think about this. If there's a constituency where you have 100 voters who want to vote or who are going to an election booth, and there are three different political parties that are fighting in a specific constituency. Uh, take an example, as it's listed here, 40 voters vote for party A, 30 voters vote for party B, and 30 voters vote for party C. Who do you think will win that specific seat? Anyone? Anyone?
Could you please repeat your question?
Yeah, sure. Imagine that there is a constituency where you have 100 people who want to vote in an election. Out of those 100 vote, and there are three political parties who are fighting in that seat. You have 40 people who are voting for party A, 30 voters who are voting for party B, and 30 voters who are voting for party C. In this instance, who do you think will win that specific constituency? Yeah, Sankirt, go ahead.
I think it's A.
Correct. And this is where seats work differently from votes, which is that you don't need to win a constituency by having the majority of votes. A constituency can be won by gaining more votes than your opposition. But for you to form a government, you need to have the seats which are a majority number. So Presumably, you can have 240 seats, but that would not be enough for you to form the government. But here, you can have 40 votes, and that's enough for you to win a constituency. That's how the concept of seats is different from the concept of votes. If you have to win a constituency right now, as Sanket pointed out, A would win because A has more votes than B and C because everybody is fighting separately. Now think about a coalition which would have been formed pre-election. Imagine now if B and C would have come together in an election, that would have meant that the both of their votes would have combined because the 30 voters that voted for B and the 30 voters that voted for C would have still voted for the coalition, but now the votes could have come together. So now think about this scenario where there is A, which gets 40 votes, and the combine of B and C, which gets a total of 60 votes. Who do you think will win?
B and C.
Yeah, the coalition of B and C. And that is why coalitions are formed, because they want to avoid voter fracturing. Yeah, Vishruth.
Yeah, but the thing is, logically speaking, party A, a single party government will be far more stable than a multi-party coalition.
Yeah, I'll come to that later. That's different part. Right now, we are discussing
My bad.
why coalitions are formed, or what is the purpose for coalitions to be formed.
Yeah.
One purpose, as we discussed earlier, was to combine the number of seats to have a majority government or to reach the majority mark. The other is to avoid voter fracturing, which is that you would want to combine your votes and the votes of the other party together to make sure that you win. The crucial difference is that you can combine your seats post an election, but you cannot combine your votes post an election, which is that today, if, for example, this thing happens and the election happens and A has 140, B has 130, and C has 130, that does not directly mean that B and C can form a government or win the constituency by combining their votes together after an election. So votes can't be combined after an election, which is to say that these parties have to come together in a coalition before the elections to make sure that they can get more votes than the next alternative. That is where you can't combine votes together artificially after an election. You have to fight in a pre-poll coalition or a pre-election coalition for you to avoid voter fracturing. And that is how coalitions are formed. Is this something that's clear to everybody? Because this is really important.
Yes.
Anybody else? Is this
Yes.
clear? Okay, perfect. The third is very simple, a broad representation. And this addresses Vishruth's point of, do coalitions actually create bad policies or do they create good policies? Someone might say that because you have a more stable government, because you do not need the support of coalitions, possibly they can do anything. But the harm of it or the downside of it is that that party might end up doing just what they want to. And this is where coalition politics becomes really important, because when you have party A, you have party B, and you have party C who come together, then presumably the interests of all three parties can be maintained, or a middle ground can be found, because because all three parties mutually benefit from each other. So A can't form a government without the support of B and C, which means that A would need the support of B and C, and as a consequence of it, A will have to listen to B and C. If A has to listen to B and C, then B and C will have the power to go ahead and influence the government that A, B, and C are creating, and hence have more diverse policies, or at the very least not allow A to do whatever they want to. So that's why broad representation is something that becomes far more prevalent when you have a coalition government, as opposed to a government where you have one party which dominates like the entire system of politics, or like one party individually gets enough number of seats. Okay, this is what I think Vishnu was discussing. What are the problem with coalitions? One of the biggest problem with coalition is just government longevity, because a political party might decide to pull out of power at any point, and just pull out of an alliance. Obviously, this is again different from an individual candidate moving away from a party, as we talked about earlier. That is different. That's where the defection law of India applies. This is where the defection law does not apply, because political parties are different entities. They can do whatever they want. So imagine A, B, and C formed a government in power of 277 seats together. Today, if B and C decide, or for example, C decide, which had 20 seats, that they are going to pull out of power because they don't like the government anymore, or they don't like the coalition anymore, and they pull out of power. Suddenly, the 277 mark comes down to 257, and the government in power does not have the majority. And this party then decides to join the opposition or the opposition alliance who has the remaining seats, and with the combination of 20 they will reach the halfway mark. In that case, the other entity, that is the opposition and the party that is left, will come into a coalition and they will form the government. So this is the biggest problem with coalition politics, which is that individual parties might pull out of the coalition at any point, which might destabilize the coalition. One of the biggest example of this is what happened in Maharashtra, which is that uh, a portion of the Shiv Sena decided to join the BJP, and that led to the fall of the Shiv Sena government and the BJP and the combination of BJP and the Shiv Sena government coming back to power. So this is something that's really prevalent in politics. Like governments, like individual political parties leave all the time because they want to have the best coalition as possible. So this is about the stability of coalitions. Obviously, the third important thing is compromises. No coalition can be formed without a compromise, as we talked about, which is that for A to come to power, they will have to listen to B and C. And B and C also know that they can't like run a government on their own without A being there. So you would need like a majority political party, but also smaller political parties who are very, very influential. So they would have to come to compromises. So they do policy concessions. So for example, if a party in Andhra Pradesh is coming to is in combination with the BJP government at the center to come to power, then BJP in return will have to make sure that the Andhra Pradesh that Andhra Pradesh political party's needs are respected, and as a consequence will give a huge amount of benefits to Andhra Pradesh relative to other states, because they would want to make sure that the government remains in power, and this is where the concept of policy concessions come in. Obviously, then there are other things like power sharing also, which is that you can't have a government of your own. For example, if the BJP government has to form a cabinet of its own today, then it has to make sure that it includes cabinet members from other political parties also, because other political parties who are within the coalition who are running the government do want people of their own on the cabinet, because that is what helps them get actual power. So those are the different things, or those are different dynamics within coalitions and within coalition governments that influence the way in which policy creation happens. Obviously, you would think that the benefit of this is that you have more diverse representation. The harm of this is that you have to compromise all the time, and governments can't implement long-term policies. Obviously, like all sorts of politics have their harms or benefits. It's all about what you believe in and whether one government can survive, or is one government better than the other. So these are things that are really, really contextual, but as concepts, these are really intriguing to learn. Do you have any questions up until now regarding this? Anyone? Or is it clear? Anything?
Could you sir just repeat policy concessions again?
Sure. So if you have A, you have B, and you have C. A has 240 seats, B has 17 seats, and C has 20 seats, and them coming together would help them get 277 seats, which helps them come to power. The thing is that A knows that without B and C, it cannot come to power, and it needs the support of both those parties. So it will naturally have to make sure that B and C don't leave the coalition, and the wishes of B and C are respected. That
Yeah.
means that A will have to give up policy concessions to B and C.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Is it clear?
Yeah.
Perfect. Anything else? Anyone? Any questions? Or do you think it's clear enough? Can I move on? Anyone? Just verbally unmute and say if it's clear. I can move on then. Let's make this
Yes, I can
interactive.
move on.
You can move on, it's clear.
It's clear.
Okay, perfect. Okay, the second part. We have covered politics. We have talked about a lot of things about how governments are formed, what are the incentives of political parties, what are the things they really want. The second is governance. So, all of the things that we have talked about is how you win an election and why political parties really love winning elections. But there's a job that a political party has beyond just being a party, that is being also a government. So, governments have to do different things, and once political parties come to power, they have to run a government for 5 years, at least in India's context, and that is where governance as a concept becomes really important. Okay, so under governance, you have two different types of governance. So you have federalism and you have very centralized leaderships. Federalism as a concept is a concept that entails devolving power to multiple different entities. What does this mean? For example, imagine that you have a school. In a school, you have different teachers and different a principal recognizes that the only way for them to run the school effectively is if they have is when they have different academic departments, and when they have an every department having a head, because they want to make sure that the principal is not directly involved in the functioning of every individual department, because that would just create more inefficiency. Or also because the department head would know the department much more than the principal, because the department head engages with their department way more than the principal does. So for example, if there is the department head of science in your school, then they would know more about the department, the different teachers in the department, as opposed to your principal, even though the principal has more power, because the science head is also a teacher. They have been a teacher previously, and they have better relations with the science teachers, as opposed to the principal directly, because for the science teachers, the principal is really inaccessible because they are too much at the center. So this is how federalism also works, which is that central authorities recognize that they have to devolve powers to local governments. And this is where the concept of state list and the uh, concept of a central list became really important, which is that uh, in the concept of federalism, everybody recognized that a specific form of government cannot run everything. So, for example, take the case of the state of Gujarat. Gujarat comes under India, but Gujarat is also Gujarat, which is that you have a state government which has the jurisdiction of running just Gujarat, and simultaneously you have a national government uh, under whose jurisdiction Gujarat also comes. So presumably, the state government and the national government both have different things, or the different ways in which they have to cater to a state. Yeah, Vishruth.
Yeah, so I come from Tamil Nadu, so we're ruled by a pro-Dravidian party currently. So
Yeah.
essentially, like, won't this foster more and more regionalism, making more regions wish for independence, as that has been stated by some politicians in Tamil Nadu as well.
Yeah, so that's a concept of secessionist states, which I'll talk about once I complete federalism. Uh, but the basic thing about federalism, at least within that context, is that some political parties or some state governments might be really radical, and they would want an independent state of their own. But most governments not don't end up doing that on the state level, because they recognize that the amount of benefits that they can have if they remain in a country are just significantly more than if they leave. So most politicians tend to say that they want a separate state, but they don't end up going through with it, because they recognize that the amount of benefits that they can get out of remaining in a country is just
Yeah.
significantly more. But the second is that they don't actually leave; they just threaten to leave, because they want to make sure that the central government gets scared and the central government gives them money or gives them lots of benefits. So it's basically just a threat tactic that most state parties use to make sure that they can get enough benefits from the center, but it actually does not happen in most cases. So that's where the concept of federalism becomes really important, because central parties or the centralized leaderships have to recognize that on the state level, the issues are very different, and they have to respect the state political parties who are running those states. And that is where the concept of federalism becomes really
So it's
important.
simply, so it's
Sorry?
simply like, so they are simply like dogs that bark but seldom bite.
I don't know if that's the appropriate phrase to say, but the thing that I will just say is that, uh, yeah, probably. I don't know. But they don't end up leaving, but it's enough of a threat for them to at least make sure that they can get enough concessions. And I think this is really healthy for democracy, actually. This is not bad for democracy, because this is what encourages regional representation also. So, for example, because there was a significant north south divide, which is that in north, most people spoke Hindi, but in the south, Hindi was something that was not as
In the very
important,
beginning.
because different states had their own different languages. That is where the concept of regionalism became really important, and that is where it was important for the central government to recognize that individual states have their own needs, and individual states also have to recognize that they can't be too separated away from the center or from the mainstream country, and they have to find the right balance. That is where the concept of federalism came in, because it recognized the requirements of different governments and their jurisdictions, and why both had to respect each other's jurisdictions. And that's where federalism became really important. Uh, and this is where I think the concept of state list and concurrent list, or the state list and the center list, becomes really important. So, for example, as I was talking about the state of Gujarat, uh, think of something like law and order. Law and order is a very state-specific issue, and that's why it would come under the jurisdiction of the state government. But for example, think about defense. Defense is something that's more of a national issue, because defense is not something that affects a state. It affects multiple states at the same time. So if there's like some violence on the India-Pakistan border, then it would have to be the Indian government that intervenes. because defense has a scope beyond a specific state. So different governments, that is, the state government has their own jurisdiction and the set of issues that they have to cater to, and there are different set of issues that the national government have to cater to. This is where there are meaningful distinctions or differences that are created between the state government of what they should do and what national government should do, and why they should not intervene in each other's business, because that is what leads to the degradation of federalism. And federalism is important for regional representation, as I illustrated earlier. Yeah. Do you have any questions on this? Any questions? Or is this clear? Hi, is this clear? Hello.
Yes, that's clear.
Perfect. Obviously, you can go through this. I have just discovered, like, I've talked about all of this here. So probably there's more division of power, there's less division of power here. Policies can vary by regions, uniform policies nationwide, obviously, because when different states are running their own states, they have different policies. The centralized government would implement one policy for everybody, and all of this. Obviously, federalism might be slower because you have multiple governments that have to work with each other. Centralized government, when there's one government working, then they can be far more efficient. But the obvious downside of it is that presumably centralized governments might end up implementing really bad policies or policies which the state does not want. So there might be a benefit in terms of time, but there's a harm in terms of diversity. So every policy or every sort of political system has its own harms and benefits. And that's why, as I said earlier, this very context specific, and different things work in different countries. It's also a lot of luck at times, which just works. But these are concepts that everybody should know about, because you should be informed about what you really want as a voter when you turn 18. Okay, tax. Uh, Obviously, states create a policy, but they want to earn money out of it. Because how do you think states would meaningfully implement more policies later? So, for example, uh, if the state is going ahead and today taxing petrol, for example, how do you think the state makes money? Because states have to implement multiple policies. So, for example, if the Modi government today implements the Mudra scheme, which provides loans to multiple people, where do you think they get the money for it? They get the money from their tax revenue, which is that they first tax certain products, and then the money that they earn as a consequence of the tax is what they use to implement their own policies or pass their own policies. That's where the concept of tax revenue becomes really important. So, for example, if you have, say, bought a commodity rather, for 2,000 rupees, out of it, around 400 rupees or 300 rupees would go as tax to the government, in the form of GST, as you would have heard, or in the form of other taxes such as VAT or service tax, all of those taxes which you would know about. You don't need to know the name of the taxes, it does not matter. What you need to know is that tax is a way in which the government earns money, and the money that they earn as a consequence of it is what they put to like developing infrastructure or like creating policies. And tax is the way in which you create policies, by earning money. Obviously, there are different things in tax. So one is tax income. As stated here, tax is the government's biggest source of income. Then the second concept here is tax rates, which is that different commodities have different taxes. So, for example, a smaller commodity like sugar will have a lesser tax percentage, but a bigger commodity, for example, say like a car, would have a bigger tax percentage. And this is where the concept of slabs of GSTs became really important, which is that some commodities were taxed at 5%, some commodities were taxed at 10%, some commodities were taxed at 20%, and vice versa, and like multiple other things that you can say. But the unique thing is that governments don't tax everything at the same rate. They identify specific products and they tax accordingly. Then you have tax structures, as I've talked about: income tax, corporate tax, value added tax. So these are just different kinds of taxes. You don't really need to know all of them specifically. You just need to know the concept of tax. And then there are tax incentives. So this is another way in which governments use the money. So, for example, if you have a company which is producing EV vehicles today because they want to avoid environmental pollution, and they are producing vehicles which are avoiding environmental pollution. What the government does in return is they provide tax benefits, which is they reduce the amount of tax which an EV company would give relative to a company which is producing conventional fossil fuel cars. The Delhi government recently did this when they implemented tax incentives for companies which were producing EV vehicles in Delhi. Because what do they want to do? They want to reduce the cost of production, which is that if a commodity today has to be produced at, for example, 20,000 rupees, and the tax on it is 3,000 rupees, then the cost of production would increase to 23,000 rupees for the company. In a world where the companies provided a tax incentive or a tax cut, the cost of production would just be 20,000 rupees. So the overall cost of production for a company would be lesser when they get tax cuts. And that is beneficial for them to earn more profits. For example, uh, think of two scenarios where there is tax and when there is a tax cut. Say, for example, on 20,000, uh, there's a tax of 3,000. So the cost of production on one end is 23,000 and the cost on the other end is 20,000 without the tax. You have to sell at the same price, which is 36,000. The amount of profit that you would earn in the first scenario is 36,000 minus 23,000, which is 13,000. But the amount of profit that you would earn in the second scenario, where there's a tax cut, is 36,000 minus 20,000, which is 16,000. So the amount of profit that you would earn in the instance where you get a tax cut is just significantly higher. And that uniquely helps you or facilitates companies, and it helps companies produce more because now they can earn more money. So in the presence of taxes, companies earn less money. In the absence of taxes, companies earn more money. Is that clear?
Yes, sir. Can I add one thing about tax rates?
Yeah,
Like
sure.
just an example. So yeah, so like certain industries such as the tobacco industry, which I'm not there are many, but let's take tobacco industry for example. The government imposes more tax on tobacco industries as it is like it's not good for the people, and as a result, by imposing taxes, it might actually lead the industry to a downfall or something like that. So it's actually benefiting the people by doing such things.
Yeah, that is true. That is true. But the other part is that the government actually never bans tobacco. They recognize that tobacco can actually be a massive source of income for them, so they just tax it high. So governments try to find the right balance between earning money via tax revenue, but also making sure that not a lot of people consume it so that it harms public health. So you see, it's so smart from a government. They don't ban tobacco ever. They just excessively tax it because it helps them earn money. It also helps to make sure that not a lot of people are consuming it. So that's about tax rates. Yeah. Any questions? Because this is like the second last slide, and then we have one final slide. Any questions, or is it clear?
No,
Can I move on?
No.
it's clear.
It's clear.
Perfect.
Very.
The final thing is, okay, sorry, I have two more slides. My bad. Budgetary allocations. So obviously, now you have earned money via tax revenue, and you have a pool of money which you can access. Obviously, it means that states will now have to put in money into multiple different things, and they can't just use their money in one thing. So they put their money into multiple things as listed here. So they put their money into social services such as healthcare, education, social welfare. They also put their money on defense and security, such as military expenditure, on economic development, on like environmental protection, on governance and administration, on research, R&D, research and innovation also, and international relations. So governments have to make sure that they're creating policies for all of these sectors, and it's not like that they let one sector die off completely. So for example, if governments spend a significant amount of money, okay, take this example, you have 20,000 rupees as a government in the form of your budget. Out of your 20,000, you have to allocate money to all sectors proportionally based on how much the sector needs the money. The difference is that one sector might need the money more than the other, but if you end up overspending in a specific sector, that means that you might have less money available to fund another sector. So if you end up spending 15,000 out of the 20,000 in social welfare, then you'll just end up ignoring every other thing here, which is infrastructure, defense and security, economic development, governance, R&D. So all of the other things get compromised. So governments have to be careful in the way in which they spend their money because they don't have unlimited money, and the number of priorities that they need to have at any point are just a lot of different things. And that's why governance is really complex. It's not a very easy thing to do. Like we can bash politicians or we can bash a government and say that they're not doing a very effective job, but it's actually not that easy to run a government because they have to care about so many different things. They have to care about 1.4 billion people in a country like India. So, and to cater to all of these things for 1.4 billion people in different states with different contexts is something that's really difficult. So, and that's why the power is not concentrated to one government. It is effectively allocated between different governments to make sure that a government can run efficiently, or governance or the process of governance can be carried out effectively. Yeah, Vishruth.
Yeah, so is the budget affected by the ideology of a party? Like whether or not it is right leaning or left leaning?
Obviously it does. And that's where policy making becomes really important. So for example, if you're a right-wing party, then you would want to spend a huge amount of money in defense and military, because as we discussed, because right-wing governments love spending on military because they are really strong governments. On the other hand, the left wing says that probably you should not spend as much on the military, you should probably spend more in social welfare. You would see the right wing putting less money in social welfare because they want to attract private investment on their own because they love capitalism. On the other hand, the left says that presumably social welfare is really important and you should pump in more money into social welfare. So obviously, it's not like all of these sectors get the same amount of money. They get different amounts of money dependent upon what ideology a government has, what sort of voter bank a government has, and that's why all of this is intertwined together. So, for example, if you have to create a social welfare policy, you would as you are not just a government, you are also a political party, so you would want to make sure that your voter base does not get isolated, and hence you would want to pass those policies or give or allocate budgets in a manner where your voter bank gets satisfied. So the thing that you would do is that you would pump in more money into the policies that makes your voter banks happy. So, and this is where competition between parties comes about. So one party says that we spend less on social welfare, but we have attracted more private investment. The other party says that we have spent more on social welfare because private companies are really bad and they are really oppressive. So different parties say different things, and different parties say that we are going to spend money at different places. And this is how election manifestos are created, because election manifestos list out the priorities that a party is going to have and the kind of policies that they're going to create. And where do you create the policies from? Like, you literally do it from your budget, because budget is your source of is the place from which you take money out to implement a policy. Is that clear?
Yeah.
Okay. Does anybody want to add anything, or think
Sir,
about?
I
Yeah,
have
sorry.
a question.
Go ahead.
In case there is something like a war or a natural disaster or something like that, where would they get the financial resources from? Because I don't see any slot where there's something related to that.
Yeah, so it's social services, social welfare, like is one of the is a broad headline for all of these things. So for natural disasters, firstly, it would come under the ambit of economic development also, because a lot of factories might get harmed as a consequence of a natural disaster. So you would want to make sure that economic development is maintained, and that's why it comes under the ambit of economic development. It also comes under the ambit of social services. So it's not like all of these things are very, very different from each other, because they are intertwined. But everything that you think about, everything around you, from the school you're going to, from the air conditioner that you have at home, from the cars that you have, to the countries that you're going to via like airplanes, all of it at some point is influenced by budgetary constraints and the policies that governments create as a consequence of the budget.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Perfect. We should. Yeah.
Can I ask a general question regarding like coalitions, even though if it's not here?
Yeah, I'll come back to it once I'm completed with this. I'll obviously
Yeah,
take
that's what I
questions in
wanted
the
to
last
check.
10 minutes.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
sure. Sure. Yeah. So this is about budgetary allocations and a bunch of different things that governments do. Obviously, this is not an exhaustive list. Governments end up spending on a huge number of things. They might come under the ambit of this, and I might have not mentioned everything here, but anything that is around you at some point is influenced by a government policy, and as a consequence, as influenced by a budget. Final thing then is public-private partnerships. So in a lot of instances, governments don't have enough money, or governments don't have the ability to go ahead and implement or like actually create buildings or create infrastructure. So what they do is that they seek the help of a private entity. What a private entity does is that the private entity facilitates a government in creating infrastructure together. So what they do is that they mutually benefit out of each other. For example, if you have a private company coming to India, for example, if you have Apple coming to India today, because Apple wants to manufacture its iPhones from India and move away from China, it would want to probably set up its plant in Uttar Pradesh, for example, say in the city of Lucknow. I'm just taking a random example. How would it benefit either of them? The government would provide Apple with land, because you would need land to set up a factory. Obviously, you would want a land in a place where the number of available workers are significant, so that the company, which is Apple, can hire a huge number of people to like give them jobs uh, in the uh, in the manufacturing sector or in the manufacturing factories of Apple. So obviously these are different benefits that the state would provide. In return, how would Apple do it, or how would Apple benefit the government? One, if Apple comes in, obviously it is a massive job employer, so it provides a huge number of job opportunities to the people there. But secondly, it would also help in more investment, or more money, because what happens is that once Apple produces Apple iPhones here in India, it sells everywhere, and then it shares some of its profits with the government, because both of them have agreed to something, or both of them have agreed to come into a public private partnership. So both the government and the private entity mutually benefit from each other, and this is the way in which you can attract more foreign investment. Obviously this is something that the right wing prioritizes way more than the left wing, because they want more public private partnerships and more foreign investors, and to make sure that the economy is not like closed out, and it's an open economy or a free market economy where companies can come in and invest and engage in competition with each other. So this is the concept of public-private partnerships. Obviously, this has its benefits and this has its harms. The benefits are that you get a lot of money, you get jobs, which are really important. The harm is that if foreign companies come in the form of public-private partnerships, that consequently means that the domestic producers get locked out. So, for example, if you have, say, a foreign textile manufacturer come to India and produce here, then the domestic producers of textile presumably get harmed significantly, because like the foreign textile manufacturer, will get significant benefits from the government the way domestic textile manufacturers don't. So that's the first harm of public-private partnerships, or like the harm of foreign companies coming to like smaller nations. The other harm is that there might be a lot of problems of regulation, which is that private companies might often be really oppressive in the way in which they frame regulations for specific individuals. So they might increase working hours, they might not pay enough, but because they have so much control over a government, and the government really benefits out of them, presumably the government will never want to regulate their behavior. So possibly there might be problem of regulations. And but the alternative is that you might have state jobs or public sector jobs without any private involvement. The benefit is that you probably get more regulation or more stability, but the harm is that these are too few in number. Not everybody, the government does not have the money the way in which private companies do. So governments can't employ like so many people, and they would need the benefit or the support of private companies. So obviously the system of PPPs has its harm, it has its benefits, but most governments to some degree do end up taking some help from private companies, because they can't alone on their own like create all infrastructure. They do need additional money. So this is about public private partnerships, and this is how they create policies. So there are three different steps here. The first step, as we talked about, is collection of money, which happens through tax. The second is, where do you allocate the money? And third, when you allocate the money, how do you implement a policy, or how do you like act upon that money? Maybe that money is not enough, and that's why you need private help. Or maybe that money is enough, but you still need private help, because they bring the expertise for you to create infrastructure the way governments don't have that expertise. So these are three different steps of how a policy is created and implemented as a consequence. So yeah, that's about it for the workshop, or at least the theoretical part of the workshop. If you have any questions now about anything, you can ask. Anything? Is this clear enough? Yeah, we should.
Yeah, so I understood PPS. So yeah, triple Ps, I'll call it that. So could I ask a general doubt about what you mentioned earlier?
Sure. About coalition?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, coalitions. So like for example, in a wartime, let's say like we're fighting a long war, and at one point the leader has to declare, let's say, a state of emergency, so that the war he tries to end the war quickly for obvious reasons. Let's say he tries to declare emergency. If he is in a coalition government, can he go ahead and do it with the president's approval, or should he check with all the coalition members?
That's a really good question. Uh, obviously, the obviously the prime minister has the authority to go to the president, declare a state of emergency. But the issue is that if the prime minister might just lose support from his own political parties, or like the coalition political parties. So presumably, if the BJP today wants to announce an emergency, then other coalition members might support it, they might not support it, and they might pull out of the government. If they pull out of the government, then it might naturally be the case that the pre-existing government might fall. So there is some power that the prime minister has, but if the coalition members don't like it, they can obviously pull out, because it's always very easy for like political parties to pull out whenever they want to.
All right. Thank you.
Perfect. Yeah, any questions? Guys, please ask. The workshop is done. I would love to take questions. Anything? Can you guys say yes or no? Anything would work at this point.
No,
No, nothing
really.
much from my side. I had one doubt and yeah, it got clarified.
Perfect. What about the others? Was
No.
it
I
clear
got all
enough?
my
No
doubts
question.
clarified as well. No questions.
Okay, perfect. That sounds good then. Okay. Yeah, Niyati, do you have a question?
Yes, so I wanted to ask that public-private partnerships, do they like increase the risk of corruption? Because according to me, in my mind, they do. And if they do, how and what are like the intermediaries which are involved in the partnership, which leads to corruption, increase in
Yeah,
corruption?
that's a
How
really good question. Yeah, sure. So what happens is that the way they can potentially increase corruption is private companies come in, and private companies can do a lot of bad things. For example, they can not provide wages to people, or to a certain amount, or the basic income that should be provided to everybody, or they might like artificially increase the working hours that people have. If that is the case, then the question really is, can you hold them accountable or can you not hold them accountable? There's one argument which says that presumably, there's one opinion which says that governments cannot hold a private company accountable because the amount of influence that like a private company has over a government. So think about this. If today you have a specific company that is employing around 1 million people in India, but are really bad with their labor regulations, the government can't afford to antagonize this specific company, because if they do, the company might just leave the country, and that will lead to a loss of 1 million jobs. So the amount of influence that a private company has over a government might be significant, to the extent that governments would never want to hold a private company accountable. So that is something that might increase the corruption in a system. The alternative argument to this is that there is no one company has a monopoly, and there are multiple companies that compete between each other. So for example, for the same project that is given to a company, say for example a company is given the tender to make a road in Bombay, there's not just one company. That company also recognizes that there are multiple companies that they have to compete with for the tender of the road. If that is the case, then they would want to make sure that they are at least respecting the rights of their labor, because if the labor rises up against them, then the amount of backlash that this will cause to the company and as a consequence to the government will be significantly high. So there is an alternate reasoning or an alternate line of reasoning for why you might still be able to effectively regulate companies. So it's all about, again, it's very contextual. It's all about the amount of influence that a company has. If the amount of influence that a company has over a government is lesser, then the chances of the government regulating the company is far more. But alternatively, if the amount of influence that a company has is a lot, then the ability for a government to hold a company liable is far lesser. So it all just depends upon the varying scales of how much influence a company might have over a government. The again, the alternative perspective to this is just that governments might just be far more corrupt. So in a world where you have no private companies at all and governments are running things on their own, they might still be really corrupt, because as we talked about political parties, like it's political parties who form governments, they can be really corrupt as well. So corruption is not something that's an exclusive function of a private company. It can also be something that can be rampant in a significantly government controlled system. So again, most systems can encourage corruption in different manners. It's all about the kind of regulations and policies that you're creating to curb it.
Right. So even if we say that it's unfair for the company which has come to India to like carelessly make the workers work for longer hours or take undue advantage of them, it again all converges to the point where the company, what's the position the company holds, right? So this is like the major weight in this whole situation.
Exactly.
Am I
So
right? All right.
absolutely. So presumably the government can control the company, but it could also be the case that the company naturally is not that bad, and they are probably more accountable of an actor than a government is. So presumably working in a private job might just be far better for you to than as opposed to working in a government job, which might still be very unregulated. So there are multiple steps to what you're saying. What you're saying depends upon whether the government is corrupt or not itself, whether private companies are corrupt or not, and the amount of influence one has over each other.
Got it. Thank you.
Perfect. Anything else? Anything else, guys?
No,
Uh,
so could I leave?
okay, sure. Before that, what I'll do is I'll just drop in some topics, debate topics, around 5 to 6 debate topics. These are basically different topics that you can look at today. I'm just going to stop the recording, I think now. Yeah.